In 2005, Jerry Hobbs spent 5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit: the murder of his own 8-year-old daughter Laura and her best friend Crystal in Zion, Illinois. After a coerced confession following over 20 hours of interrogation, Jerry faced the death penalty while the real killer walked free. DNA evidence would eventually prove his innocence, but not before the actual perpetrator, Jorge Avila Torres, murdered another victim and attacked 3 more women in Virginia. This case exposes how tunnel vision and investigative failures can destroy innocent lives while allowing dangerous criminals to continue their violent sprees. Jerry received an $8 million settlement, but the psychological damage remains irreparable. The officers who coerced his false confession faced no consequences. If you're interested in true crime cases that expose flaws in our justice system, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share with others who appreciate investigative journalism. What started as a simple bike ride to a familiar neighborhood park would trigger a chain of investigative failures that would destroy multiple lives and allow a dangerous killer to remain free for years. Laura Hobbs was born on September 25, 1996, in Texas. Following her parents' separation, she moved with her mother and 3 brothers to the small lakeside town of Zion, Illinois. This quiet community became Laura's sanctuary, where she lived near her maternal grandparents and formed an unbreakable bond with 9-year-old Crystal, who attended the same school. In spring 2005, Laura's father Jerry made a decision that would change everything. He chose to reconcile with his family and relocated from Texas to rejoin his wife and children. The reunion seemed promising, offering hope for a fresh start. Jerry had recently been released from an 18-month prison sentence, just weeks before arriving in Zion. His incarceration stemmed from a probation violation related to a disturbing 2001 incident involving a chainsaw, where he chased 3 men who had intervened in a domestic dispute. Despite Jerry's criminal history, which included drug offenses and assault charges, the family appeared ready to move forward together. His past troubles seemed like distant memories as they began rebuilding their lives in this peaceful community. On Sunday, May 8, 2005, Mother's Day, the reunited family celebrated at Lake Michigan. They spent the afternoon flying kites and enjoying what seemed like a perfect day. Laura and Crystal, inseparable best friends who spent nearly all their free time together, decided to take their bikes to the nearby park. The park was only a few hundred yards from their homes and featured a long bike trail that the girls frequently used for their adventures. Parents felt completely secure allowing their daughters this independence in their small town, where serious crimes were extremely rare. The sense of safety in Zion gave families confidence in letting children explore their neighborhood freely. The girls departed around 3 o'clock in the afternoon with plans to return home for dinner. As evening approached and 7 o'clock arrived without their return, concern began mounting among both families. What had started as a routine bike ride to a familiar neighborhood park was about to trigger a series of events that would expose catastrophic investigative failures. What started as a simple bike ride to a familiar neighborhood park would trigger a chain of investigative failures that would destroy multiple lives and allow a dangerous killer to remain free for years. When Laura and Crystal failed to return by 7 o'clock in the evening, their worried parents went directly to the park to call them home, only to find the area completely empty. The absence of their daughters immediately triggered alarm bells. Family members and friends quickly mobilized, joining the search effort and scouring the park grounds and surrounding neighborhood streets for several hours, until darkness made their efforts impossible. By 9 o'clock that evening, realizing that something serious may have occurred, both families contacted the police. The gravity of the situation became undeniable as hours passed without any trace of the 2 young girls. Law enforcement immediately mobilized a comprehensive search operation, demonstrating the urgency they felt about locating the missing children. They enlisted volunteer organizations, deployed trained search dogs, and coordinated with dozens of volunteers alongside concerned local residents who wanted to help find Laura and Crystal. Police methodically interviewed children along the route from the girls' homes to the park, confirming that Laura and Crystal had indeed passed by earlier that day. Witnesses remembered seeing them stop to chat and mentioned that they were heading to the park for their bike ride. Simultaneously, officers conducted thorough door-to-door inquiries throughout the entire neighborhood and distributed missing person flyers to raise community awareness. As each hour passed without any trace of the girls, the grim reality of their situation became increasingly apparent to everyone involved in the search efforts. The intensive search continued relentlessly through the night until approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, when police coordinators decided to take a temporary break to regroup and reassess their strategy. However, Laura's father, Jerry, and her grandfather refused to return home, choosing instead to continue their desperate search independently. Their determination to find the girls drove them to persist when others needed rest. They returned to the park area and made the strategic decision to split up, believing they could cover more ground in their continued efforts to locate Laura and Crystal. Around 6 o'clock in the morning, as dawn's first light began breaking across the landscape, Laura's grandfather heard a cry piercing the morning air and rushed toward the sound. He discovered Jerry in complete shock, claiming to have found the bodies of Laura and Crystal lying off the bike path amid thick undergrowth. Jerry immediately recognized that both girls were dead due to the visible blood and injuries he observed on their bodies. He called police without delay, and officers arrived promptly to secure the crime scene for investigation. The discovery of the bodies marked the beginning of a catastrophic investigation that would focus on the wrong suspect while the real killer walked free, setting the stage for additional victims. Forensic examination revealed the horrifying truth about how Laura and Crystal died. The cause of death was determined to be multiple stab wounds, most likely inflicted with a knife. Laura had sustained 20 separate injuries, while Crystal suffered 11 wounds. This brutal discovery sent immediate shockwaves through the small community of Zion, where such violent crimes were virtually unheard of in their peaceful town. The horrifying reality that an unknown assailant had murdered 2 young girls just hundreds of meters from their homes created immediate fear and urgency for law enforcement. Police immediately focused all available resources on identifying and apprehending the perpetrator. But their investigative approach would prove fundamentally flawed from the very beginning. Police suspicion immediately fell on Jerry Hobbs, Laura's father, primarily because he had discovered the bodies after the park had already been thoroughly searched by officers and volunteers during the night. This circumstance raised significant concerns among investigators, leading them to examine Jerry's background more closely and with increasing scrutiny. Their investigation revealed a significant criminal history spanning from drug-related offenses in his youth to serious assault charges against other people. The most serious incident had occurred in 2001 while the family still lived in Texas, when Jerry and his wife had a heated argument in front of their home. 3 passing men noticed the domestic situation and intervened, believing the woman was in immediate danger. Jerry became completely infuriated by their interference, retrieved his chainsaw from the garage, and began chasing the 3 men until they managed to subdue him and hold him until police arrived at the scene. This frightening incident led to serious charges and eventually resulted in a 10-year probation sentence. Jerry's legal troubles escalated significantly when he missed a required probation appointment, resulting in his probation being revoked and an 18-month prison sentence being imposed. Most significantly for investigators, he had been released from prison just weeks before the tragic deaths of his daughter and her friend, arriving in Zion almost immediately after his release from custody. For investigators building their case, Jerry's demonstrated propensity for aggressive and violent behavior, combined with his recent release from prison, created what seemed like a compelling suspect profile that fit their developing theory. Despite having no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene and no clear motive for killing his own daughter, police invited Jerry for questioning, which he willingly agreed to undergo. During more than 20 hours of intensive interrogation, investigators gradually increased psychological pressure on Jerry regarding his potential involvement in the murders. Initially, Jerry consistently denied any involvement whatsoever in the murders, maintaining that he had simply searched for Laura when she failed to return home as planned, ultimately discovering both girls' bodies in the park during his desperate search efforts. However, under relentless and increasingly aggressive pressure from experienced detectives, Jerry's story began changing, and eventually he started making incriminating statements that would lead to a full confession. Jerry's confession seemed to close the case, but the real killer remained free, and the coercive interrogation methods used would later become the subject of intense scrutiny and legal challenges. Jerry's confession provided investigators with a detailed narrative of the alleged crime. He claimed that on the evening in question, he went searching for Laura and found her in the park with Crystal. According to his statement, he scolded Laura for leaving home without permission and demanded she come home immediately. But she refused his demands and resisted. When he grabbed Laura's arm attempting to physically take her home, she continued to resist, and Crystal also demanded he leave Laura alone and stop hurting her. Jerry claimed that Crystal then produced a small knife from her pocket and pointed the weapon at him, which infuriated him beyond control. He alleged that he seized the knife from Crystal and inflicted multiple stab wounds on both girls in a fit of rage, then left their bodies in the overgrown area before returning later to discover them and report the finding to police authorities. During this confession, Jerry was visibly emotional and crying throughout the interrogation. Yet he signed the written admission statement and repeated his confession on camera for investigators. The confession appeared to solve the case quickly, providing law enforcement with a clear narrative and identified suspect. Following Jerry's arrest and the prosecutor's announcement of intent to seek the death penalty, significant developments began undermining the foundation of the entire case. Jerry was appointed legal representation, and he immediately claimed complete innocence, alleging his confession was coerced under immense psychological pressure during more than 20 hours of continuous interrogation without rest. According to Jerry's account, detectives threatened both him and his family while subjecting him to physical abuse during the prolonged questioning sessions. Jerry maintained that after not sleeping for over 2 days and being in an extremely distraught emotional state from finding his daughter brutally murdered, he couldn't cope with the overwhelming grief and trauma. He claimed investigators told him that simply confessing to the murders would result in his immediate release and allow him to finally rest. Jerry alleged that detectives essentially formulated the most likely scenario for him, and he merely repeated their suggested words when they constructed a coherent narrative for him to sign and read on camera. His attorney immediately requested a comprehensive case review, but this request was swiftly denied by the court system. The prosecution argued that Jerry had confessed voluntarily and confirmed his statement on video recording, making his retraction irrelevant. This forced Jerry to face a full jury trial, prolonging his imprisonment for several additional years while he awaited his day in court. The DNA evidence clearly exonerated Jerry, but the prosecution's refusal to acknowledge this new evidence would prolong his imprisonment while the real killer continued his violent crimes elsewhere. During Jerry's extended imprisonment, his lawyer made a crucial discovery regarding the investigation's fundamental shortcomings. The defense attorney learned there wasn't a single piece of actual physical evidence against his client and decided to focus his efforts on searching for alternative leads and explanations. Most significantly, he discovered that medical examiners had not thoroughly examined the victims' bodies according to standard forensic protocols. While routine procedures like taking DNA swabs and collecting debris from under the girl's fingernails had been conducted during the initial autopsy, these crucial samples had been stored in refrigeration without anyone considering analyzing their contents for potential evidence. The defense lawyer pushed aggressively to have all collected evidence examined in an independent laboratory, despite persistent prosecution efforts to obstruct and delay these critical examinations. He ultimately succeeded in his objective, and in 2008, the comprehensive examinations were finally conducted by qualified forensic specialists. The laboratory results provided an unexpected and dramatic twist that completely changed the case. Analysis revealed that Laura's body contained several different DNA samples, including foreign skin tissue under her fingernails, and male semen found on her clothes and in 3 different places on her body. Simple DNA analysis revealed that none of this biological evidence belonged to Laura's father. It all pointed to a completely different man. Jerry's lawyer immediately requested his client's release from prison and dismissal of all charges following these DNA discoveries, but encountered an unpleasant surprise from the prosecution. The district prosecutor refused to acknowledge the significance of the new evidence, claiming it meant nothing, and that the presence of foreign DNA on Laura's body could have been entirely coincidental. The prosecutor argued that young couples regularly visited the park for intimate encounters, and he believed this explained why male semen ended up on the girl's body, possibly transferred from grass or bushes where previous activity had occurred. Even the fact that biological samples were found inside the victim's body didn't seem to concern the prosecutor, despite the obvious absurdity of this explanation for an 8-year-old victim. While Jerry remained imprisoned, despite clear evidence of his innocence, hundreds of miles away in Virginia, the real killer was beginning a new series of violent crimes that would finally lead to his identification. 4 years after the tragic Zion murders, 20-year-old Amanda Snell was living at a military base in Arlington, Virginia, having recently enlisted in the armed forces following her family's proud military tradition. Her commitment to service extended beyond her official duties, as she also volunteered at a local church near the base, dedicating her free time to teaching children with autism and developmental differences. Amanda had discovered her true passion for this meaningful work and had made concrete plans to pursue the necessary education and training after completing her military service commitment. Her dedication to helping vulnerable children demonstrated her compassionate character and desire to make a positive difference in the world. On July 13, 2009, Amanda failed to report for her scheduled duty, immediately raising serious concerns among her fellow service members who knew her reliability. When concerned colleagues went to her room and knocked on the door without receiving any response, they discovered the door was unlocked and decided to enter to check on her welfare. The room appeared impeccably tidy, with the bed perfectly made, and all belongings neatly arranged in their proper places, but Amanda was nowhere to be found. Only after opening the closet door did they encounter a horrifying sight that would haunt them forever. Amanda's lifeless body lay in an unnatural position with a pillowcase covering her head. Initial medical examination couldn't definitively determine the cause of death, requiring more extensive forensic analysis. Examiners later concluded that Amanda had died of suffocation, with death occurring over a full day before her body's discovery by her concerned fellow service members. Notably, there were no obvious signs of physical trauma on her body, and preliminary examination indicated she had not been sexually assaulted. Investigators discovered that Amanda's laptop computer and tablet device were missing from her room, suggesting a possible motive of theft for the crime. Amanda's parents provided investigators with important background information about her medical condition that could be relevant to the case. She suffered from severe, debilitating headaches, and when the pain became completely unbearable, she would retreat to dark rooms and put pillowcases over her head to block out light and reduce her suffering. Given that Amanda was found in her dark closet with a pillowcase over her head, detectives initially speculated that the death might have been a tragic accident related to her medical condition. However, they didn't dismiss the murder theory entirely, as they had discovered a man's shoe print directly in front of her closet, though they couldn't establish the ownership or significance of this evidence. The investigation remained active with continued efforts to locate a potential killer and determine the true circumstances surrounding Amanda's mysterious death. In February 2010, a 26-year-old Arlington woman exiting a metro station and heading toward her boyfriend's home was approached by an unknown man who displayed a gun and demanded she get into his car, marking the beginning of a violent crime spree. The Arlington attacks were just the beginning of a violent spree that would reveal the true identity of the Zion killer and expose the massive investigative failures that had allowed him to continue his crimes undetected for years. Despite the assailant grabbing her arm and brandishing a knife threateningly, the woman managed to break free by throwing her purse as a distraction and fleeing toward her boyfriend's nearby house. Her desperate cries for help brought her boyfriend and his friends rushing onto the street, and they immediately called police for assistance, though the assailant had already fled the scene. The woman provided detailed descriptions of the attacker's physical appearance and remembered specific details about his car model, a beige Dodge Durango. Based on the victim's comprehensive description, police created a composite sketch and began their systematic search for the dangerous suspect. 2 weeks after this first Arlington attack, on February 27th, 2 women returning home from an evening with friends found an unknown man approaching from behind, brandishing a gun and demanding their wallets and personal belongings. When the women informed him they had no money with them, the assailant forced them inside the house at gunpoint and bound their hands with restraints. During a critical moment when he left the room, one woman managed to free her hands, grabbed a nearby phone, and dialed 911 for emergency assistance. However, the man quickly returned, snatched the phone from her hands, and smashed it violently against the wall to prevent further communication. The assailant then grabbed one of the women, forcibly took her to his car, and drove away to an isolated location. After covering some distance, he raped her, taped her head completely with duct tape, and strangled her with a scarf until she lost consciousness and appeared dead. She later regained consciousness lying in the snow by the roadside, where concerned passers-by found her and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency medical treatment. Police promptly arrived at the hospital, and the traumatized woman provided them with a detailed description of her attacker and mentioned his distinctive car model, the same beige Dodge Durango. Remarkably, just 2 hours before this brutal attack, another woman had reported to police that a man matching the identical description and driving the same type of vehicle had approached her on the street and attempted to coerce her into his vehicle. She had successfully used her stun gun on him and managed to escape before he could harm her. Investigators realized they were dealing with a serial and highly dangerous criminal actively operating in their area, escalating his violence with each attack. Police focused their concentrated efforts on tracing the distinctive vehicle through motor vehicle databases, methodically visiting all registered owners of such cars in the area. They soon experienced a breakthrough during their inspection of one particular vehicle. Torres's arrest for the Virginia crimes would soon reveal his connection to the unsolved Zion murders through a remarkable series of confessions and DNA matches. During their vehicle inspection, investigators discovered compelling evidence directly linking the suspect to his crimes. They found a student identification card belonging to the woman who had been left to die in the snow, along with her distinctive earring. Inside the car, they also found the same type of duct tape used to bind her head and a stun gun matching the description provided by other victims. The car's owner was identified as 21-year-old Jorge Avila Torres, who was serving in the military at the very same base where Amanda Snell's body had been discovered several months earlier. Moreover, he lived in the same building as Amanda, occupying an CO apartment just a few floors below her residence. During the comprehensive search of his room, investigators found a pistol he had purchased less than a month ago, along with numerous rounds of ammunition. On his personal computer, they discovered significant amounts of explicit videos depicting violence and cruelty, some featuring unconscious women in disturbing scenarios. Photographs of Torres were shown to all three attacked women, and they unanimously identified him without hesitation, remembering his face clearly because he hadn't attempted to conceal his identity during any of the assaults. Following Torres's arrest and placement in custody pending trial for kidnapping one woman and assaulting two others, investigators suspected his involvement in Amanda's murder, but initially lacked concrete evidence linking him to that crime. Detectives devised a strategic plan by planting an informant in his jail cell, someone willing to wear a recording device and engage him in seemingly casual conversation. Surprisingly, this investigative tactic worked remarkably fast, with Torres beginning to confess to his various crimes within a single week of the informant's placement. Torres openly boasted about killing Amanda, stating he committed the murder simply because the opportunity presented itself and for the adrenaline rush he experienced. He provided detailed accounts of how he placed her body in the closet and mentioned that after the murder, he had to meticulously clean her room to erase any traces of his presence. However, Torres unknowingly left behind crucial evidence during his cleanup process. The criminal revealed to his cellmate that he had sexually assaulted Amanda on her bed using contraception, and after moving her lifeless body to the closet, he carefully made her bed, but removed the top sheet while leaving the mattress pad in place. Police immediately sent the mattress pad to their forensic laboratory, where experts found a tiny but significant sample of male semen that matched Torres's DNA perfectly. Furthermore, Torres mentioned to his informant that he had kept a specific pair of Nike sneakers in his car during his crimes. Crime scene analysts seized the shoes and compared the sole pattern to the footprint found outside Amanda's closet. The sole pattern was an exact match, providing definitive physical evidence. Meanwhile, a sample of Torres's DNA had been uploaded to the FBI's national database. Several weeks after the sample was added, investigators in Zion received notification of a perfect match between Torres's DNA and the semen samples found on Laura Hobbs's body. Jerry's exoneration would lead to legal consequences for the authorities, while Torres faced justice for his crimes in multiple jurisdictions. The DNA match revealed an even more astonishing connection. Torres was originally from Zion and was friends with Crystal's older brother. This relationship confirmed that both Laura and Crystal knew Torres personally, a fact corroborated by other children in the neighborhood who remembered his presence. At the time of the girls' deaths in 2005, Torres was just 16 years old, and police hadn't considered him a suspect at all, being solely focused on Laura's father. The DNA match definitively proved Jerry's complete innocence after he had spent 5 long years in jail awaiting trial. Jerry's attorney immediately demanded his client's release and the dropping of all charges. This time the prosecutor couldn't argue against the evidence, as the discovery of Torres's semen on Laura's body eliminated any possibility of her father's involvement in the crime. After his release, Jerry announced his intention to sue police and authorities for coercing a false confession and causing 5 years of wrongful imprisonment. The authorities quickly realized they had no chance of winning this lawsuit, and in the event of a loss, they would be held financially accountable for their misconduct and investigative incompetence. They offered Jerry a substantial settlement, which he accepted, receiving nearly $8 million in compensation. Regarding Torres, the legal process in Virginia concluded 4 years after his arrest. Despite refusing to admit guilt throughout the proceedings, the jury unanimously found him guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to death for Amanda's murder, and for the attempted abduction of 2 other women and kidnapping of a third. He received 5 life sentences plus 168 years in prison. Immediately following this conviction, Torres was extradited to Illinois, where the trial for Laura and Crystal's murders began. Initially, he denied guilt, and his lawyer argued that the semen found on the victim wasn't sufficient evidence alone to prove his client's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. However, Torres was eventually presented with a plea deal. He was already facing the death penalty, and even if execution were delayed for decades, as often happens, he would never walk free again. The criminal agreed to confess to the murders in exchange for an additional 100 years in prison and transfer to a different facility, as he felt his life was in danger at his current location due to the nature of his crimes involving children. The case's conclusion exposed systemic failures that had devastating consequences extending far beyond the original crimes. The terms of Torres's plea deal didn't require him to reveal all details of his crimes. It was sufficient for him to admit to the killings and accept responsibility. As a result, Torres remains behind bars awaiting execution that has yet to occur, due to lengthy appeals processes. Regarding the police officers who coerced Jerry into signing a false confession, none faced any professional consequences or disciplinary action for their misconduct. Jerry himself couldn't fully return to normal life after his release and exoneration. The trauma of his experience led him to begin using drugs as a coping mechanism. He was subsequently arrested for resisting arrest, later escaped custody, and received a 2-year prison sentence for these additional offenses. He also couldn't successfully reunite with his family and chose to live alone in Texas, separated from his remaining children and former wife. After his final release, Jerry gave a revealing interview admitting that the coerced confession had irreparably damaged his life and psychological well-being, stating, "I found my daughter dead. They didn't even need to try to break me. I was already broken." The local police department and county prosecutor's office received well-deserved criticism from national media and the public for their catastrophic handling of the case. If they hadn't fixated on a single suspect, but instead conducted a thorough and professional investigation, they would have had a much better chance of catching the real criminal much earlier. Instead, they inadvertently allowed Torres to kill 1 woman and attack 3 more, and these are only the cases known to authorities. There may have been additional unreported victims. The Zion murders case represents a textbook example of confirmation bias and tunnel vision in criminal investigations. The coercive interrogation techniques, prosecutorial obstruction of exonerating evidence, and failure to conduct proper forensic analysis created a perfect storm of injustice. The financial settlement Jerry received, while substantial, cannot restore the 5 years of his life lost to wrongful imprisonment, or repair the psychological damage caused by being falsely accused of murdering his own daughter. The lack of accountability for those responsible sends a troubling message about consequences of investigative misconduct.